Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into, a really fascinating topic drawn directly from the sources you've provided. We're doing a deep dive into the claim that Prophet Muhammad is the single most influential person in history. Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. The material you shared, it really centers around this specific claim made by historian and mathematician Michael Hart. It's detailed in his work where he set out to compile this list of the 100 most profound human beings. And he worked with other historians and biographers on this. So our mission in this deep dive, it's pretty simple but focused. We're going to explore why, specifically according to this source material, Muhammad ended up at the very top of that list. We'll dig into the specific details, the reasoning the source uses to back this up, and we're sticking strictly only to the information you gave us. Yeah, this is tailored just for you. We want to cut through the noise, get right to the core of what these sources say about this ranking and the characteristics they highlight. Okay, so let's start with the foundation, right? As the source presents it. Who is Michael Hart, and what was this project all about?
Well, according to the source, Michael Hart is identified as a contemporary historian and also a mathematician. He kicked off this project, bringing in other historians and biographers too. The goal, to identify and rank the 100 most, profound human beings across all of history.
Profound.
And the source describes their approach as pretty rigorous, actually. They use a methodology based on comparing people across 32 different categories. The idea, as it's presented here, was to have a structured way to evaluate influence and significance.
32 categories. Wow. Okay, and based on that methodology, where did Muhammad land on the list according to the source?
The source states it really clearly. Michael Hart placed Muhammad at number 1, right at the very head of the list. And interestingly, the source claims his collaborators, well, they might have had their own preferences, maybe, but they couldn't really dispute that position once they applied their own categorical framework.
That's a strong claim right there. The source also mentions Hart's personal feelings about it, which is interesting.
It does, yeah. The source notes that Michael Hart, being a Christian himself, apparently stated he personally would have preferred to put Jesus Christ at the top. However, the source claims Hart concluded he couldn't really do that honestly, based purely on the categories they'd agreed upon, because Muhammad fulfilled certain historical roles that Jesus Christ, according to Hart, as quoted in the source, did not.
Okay, what kind of roles are we talking about here?
The source gets specific, highlighting these differences from Hart's perspective, again, as presented here. According to Hart in the source, Jesus wasn't a father, Muhammad was. Jesus wasn't a husband, Muhammad was. Jesus wasn't a statesman, Muhammad was. Jesus wasn't a warrior, Muhammad was. And Jesus wasn't a ruler, while Muhammad was. So the source presents these as like key roles within those 32 categories that, in Hart's analysis, pushed Muhammad to that top spot.
Right. And the source seems to suggest this information, about Hart's ranking and his reasoning, it isn't some hidden secret.
That's right. The source explicitly claims you can actually find this statement from Michael Hart. It mentions the archives of Time magazine, the magazine of the New York Times, and also that it's readily available just by searching online. Google search for Michael Hart and his work on this ranking.
Okay, so that kind of lays out Hart's project and his specific reasoning, at least as the source tells it. But the source doesn't stop there, does it? It brings in other voices.
No, it definitely brings in more. It includes some pretty notable quotes to bolster the point. For instance, there's a quote attributed to George Bernard Shaw. It suggests basically that if a man like Muhammad were to, say, take charge of the modern world today, he'd be uniquely successful. He'd solve its problems, bring peace and happiness. That's the claim.
Quite a statement attributed to Shaw. Any others?
Yeah, there's another one from Castle's Weekly, according to the source. This one emphasizes the speed and scale of his early impact. It says that in just over a year, Muhammad became the spiritual, nominal, and temporal ruler of Medina, wielding influence powerful enough, and this is the quote, to shake the world.
Wow. Okay. And I guess the source uses these to circle back to Hart's point about that unique dual success.
Precisely. Yeah, it kind of reiterates Hart's view as presented that Muhammad really stands out. Arguably the only figure in history who hit that supreme success level on both religious and secular levels at the same time. Founding a major world religion and establishing a state, a government structure.
Okay, let's dig a bit deeper then into how the source actually paints the picture of Muhammad's life and the nature of his impact to justify this #1 ranking.
Well, the source tells a really compelling story of his journey. It starts with him as an orphan, raised in Mecca, facing extreme persecution later on.
Yeah.
Being driven out, followers killed. Pretty intense stuff described. Yet, according to the source, he comes back triumphantly just 23 years later, a victor, a conqueror.
And what happened when he returned, according to the source?
A key point the source highlights about that return to Mecca is that he apparently gave everyone amnesty, total forgiveness. It then described how his message and his actual realm spread really rapidly throughout the Arabian Peninsula, establishing Islam not just as, a faith, but as a state, a whole government structure.
And what's really striking, as the source describes it anyway, is his personal lifestyle, even after gaining all that power.
Yes, the source makes a specific point of noting that even as a ruler, he reportedly kept eating, drinking, dressing in the same simple way he always had. Since birth, it says.
And his character, how does the source describe that?
It puts a really strong emphasis on his character, describing him as fundamentally just and fair. It claims he avoided any kind of favoritism, like no special treatment for family or friends, and didn't let personal likes or dislikes influence his judgments. And the source explicitly contrasts this with many modern leaders it actually names, like kings, presidents, judges today.
Interesting contrast. And the source indicates his focus wasn't just on, worldly power or day-to-day affairs.
Oh, far from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the source mentions his constant reflection on the hereafter, the afterlife. It even quotes from the Quran, "Al-Akhirah is better for you than what is present," suggesting, a much deeper motivation beyond just temporal worldly gains.
So what about the core message he brought, as the source understands and presents it?
The source describes his fundamental message as basically a call to all humanity to worship only the Creator, and, crucially, to actively work to destroy all forms of injustice here on Earth, and also to establish a paradigm, like an exemplary standard for human conduct for people to follow. The source makes a very strong claim here, saying this core message is on every single page of the Quran.
Wow. Okay, the source also gets pretty specific, almost down to anecdotes when describing his actions and qualities.
It does present some really striking details. For example, the source claims he never once in his entire life physically struck another human being. Not a servant, not a wife, child, friend, not even an enemy, with, it notes, one single exception, when that enemy was directly opposing Allah and the message, as the source puts it.
Okay, that's quite specific. What else?
Well, it includes descriptions from his companions, people who were with him, about his presence on the battlefield. They apparently recounted finding him deep in the fighting, like right in the middle of the enemy forces. And they felt so protected by him that they would seek shelter behind him. The source kind of labels him both a warrior and a statesman, right there on the battlefield.
But then it contrasts that intensity and how he was in other situations.
Absolutely. Yeah, the source paints this picture of him off the battlefield. Eyes typically downcast, speaking softly, possessing a gentle, warm. It uses words like sacred, soft, caring, even tearful sometimes. A very different demeanor.
That's a wide range, and it lists daily activities, too.
It does. It provides this really fascinating list of his day-to-day stuff, highlighting just how broad and, normal some of it was. Things like feeding the poor, visiting the sick, managing the army's affairs, acting as a statesman and arbiter, but also just talking to ordinary people.
Yeah.
Addressing women, giving out charity to zakat, even showing his own clothes, washing his house, shopping for food. Activities the source points out are, very relatable parts of just being human.
Right. Relatable. But then there's his nightly routine, which the source says was demanding in a whole different way.
Yeah, the source mentions him regularly standing in prayer for 4 or 5 hours at a time during the night, consistently. And then it kind of poses this rhetorical question to you, the listener. How could one man possibly manage all of that? Leading armies, governments, teaching, judging, all the daytime stuff, and still dedicate 4 or 5 hours every night to prayer. The source uses this to really emphasize the scale of his capacity and dedication as it presents him.
It's painting a picture of immense capacity. The source also draws on its primary text, the Quran, right, to list specific attributes.
Yes, exactly. The source lists a whole series of descriptions that it says are taken directly from the Quran, presenting them as fundamental aspects of his identity and his role. Things like being a witness over believers, being no more than a messenger, gentle with people, a great favor from God, the irrefutable truth, that unlettered prophet, a mercy and a messenger, mercy specifically to mankind, a witness over believers while believers are witnesses over mankind, mercy to the entire world, the best example for humanity to follow, the last prophet sent to mankind, sent to all mankind and jinn, ultimately victorious over all other systems, and created on an exalted standard of character. The source basically uses this list to show the immense significance attributed to him within its own tradition.
Okay. And finally, the source really drives home its point about his unique status by comparing him directly to a whole bunch of other major historical figures.
Yeah, it explicitly states its conclusion. Based on all this, there is simply no person in the whole of history who can truly compare with Muhammad, not in terms of the totality of his influence and the roles he fulfilled.
And it names names for comparison.
Oh yeah, it provides a pretty long list of prominent historical figures just for comparison's sake. Let's see. Confucius, Mahatma Buddha, Alexander the Great, Napoleon Bonaparte, Julius Caesar, Constantine, Mahatma Gandhi, King Richard, King Ferdinand, Winston Churchill, Charles Darwin, Deng Xiaoping, Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, Martin Luther King Jr., George Washington, John F. Kennedy, Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, John Howard, George Bush Sr., George Bush Jr. And then the source makes it really personal. It adds that not you, the listener, not me, not our parents, our grandparents, or any of our ancestors can match this man, Muhammad, as the sources presented him.
Wow, that's comprehensive. So pulling all this together, what does it really mean? According to the sources you shared, right, particularly this video and the claims it attributes to Michael Hart. The argument is basically that using this rigorous 32-category system, Muhammad was objectively ranked as the most influential person in history.
Exactly. And the source backs this up by highlighting what it presents as his unique success. Success across both religious and secular areas. And his fulfillment of multiple critical roles, father, husband, statesman, warrior, ruler. Roles, it claims, set him apart from other huge figures like Jesus Christ, specifically within the framework of Hart's method.
And the source then builds that case further, detailing specific aspects of his life, his character, his actions, descriptions from the Quran, painting this picture of, well, comprehensive leadership, deep compassion, profound personal qualities. And it throws in supportive views from people like George Bernard Shaw, too.
Yeah, it's very clear this source presents an incredibly specific, highly detailed, and extremely positive perspective on Muhammad's historical impact, his character, and his influence, calling it unparalleled.
Right. But here's where it gets, as you said earlier, really interesting, maybe even a bit challenging, right? The way the source concludes.
Yeah, it finishes with this direct address, mainly aimed at non-Muslims. It issues a kind of challenge, asking them to read about Muhammad if they dare. It suggests that if you approach this reading with an open heart and open mind, it could lead to, well, profound love and respect for him, and potentially even to becoming a follower of his message, stating that doing so ultimately only benefits the reader themselves, not anyone else.
So this really raises a pretty significant question for you, the listener, to think about, based purely on this source's presentation. What does it actually signify when a historical figure's influence is described not just in terms of, political shifts or religious movements, but in terms that the source itself claims could be personally transformative, life-changing even, for someone just reading about them today?